Okay, hi everyone again. So sorry for the technical delays. We are going to talk to people that are going to be starting medical school next month. First of all, congratulations. I'm Jackie Goldman. I am a recent residency graduate. So as you could see, I started medical school some time ago, but a lot of the principles hold true. We are still waiting for some of our other panelists to join us. And they should be on shortly. But in the meantime, we want to make sure that everyone here gets the information that they need before they start. So we did have some questions that were pre-submitted, and we're going to get to those as well. Like I said, our moderator is still waiting to join, but I will go ahead and grab them and we can start going through some of our questions. So give me 1 second, we'll pull them up. Are most people can reply privately in the chat. If you want to just send it to me anonymously as the host, you can go ahead and do that, or you can post it like publicly. If you don't want it to be public, then just say host and then don't send it to everyone. But are most people going to medical school in the Northeast, West Coast? If people feel comfortable sharing, again, this is a pretty closed form to share with others. But if you feel comfortable sharing, it would be helpful to know where people are going to be attending school. So just in terms of some of the questions that people had beforehand, one of the questions that was submitted was, what will my days look like as a medical student? So that is a great question. And again, this does vary depending on the medical school you attend, but usually medical schools are divided based off of labs and then didactics and small groups. So labs tend to be anatomy lab, histology lab, radiology lab, and then there's also small groups, which is usually you with anywhere between 5 to 15 other students, depending on the size of your medical school. We had small groups with 12 students. For us, they were called PBLs, or problem-based learning. And let me just see if people are still on. Okay, I think enable to host and panelists. Oh, I'm so sorry that that's the case. Everyone should be able to send chat. So like I said, we'll try to fix that soon. Fixed, okay. Okay, so we have small groups as well, and those are usually run by either a PhD or a medical doctor, going over cases. So it could be a case of, for example, a teenager with, a specific condition, and then you kind of have to, based off of what you're learning in lectures and didactics, you're able to apply clinical reasoning to those cases. Most medical schools also have clinical skill labs. And those clinical skill labs are meant to teach you physical exam. So things like, how to do an abdominal exam, how to check for vitals, that kind of things. Those are typically important basics for learning how to doctor. Hold on 1 second. Okay. So we talked about small groups. We talked about labs, again, histology, radiology, anatomy labs. And then we talked about clinical skill labs, which are for you to learn physical exam, vitals, abdominal exam, heart exam, lungs, etc. And the other major component is didactics or lecture. Now, depending on the medical school, they're not always mandatory. Some medical schools may make didactics mandatory, but more often than not, in most schools, they are not mandatory. And that's partially because medical school is pass-fail. In some medical schools, they might give, a high pass or an honors for the preclinical part of the curriculum. For some medical schools, that's only those special honors level grades are assigned in the clinical part of medical school, which are the last 2 years typically, where you're actually doing rotations of the hospital. And then, you can be assigned like a high pass or an honors grade. For the preclinical years, again, for the most part, it's just pass fail. So because you have to learn so much information in such a short period of time, they usually do try to make it pass fail, and that therefore you are taking exams, you want to pass your exams, but not all of the exams are completely dependent on lecture content. This is really something that depends on the medical school. At my medical school, our multiple choice exams were based off of NBMEs, so former like recycled USMLE questions. So they were basically just old board questions. And they were all multiple choice. So you could attend the lectures and learn from, the PhDs and the medical doctors that are teaching you, or you could use question banks and other resources to learn the standardized question material. It's the same as if you were an undergrad, and your chemistry teacher basically took from a question bank and just recycled the questions over, so you could attend the lectures to learn the material, or you could learn it on your own and then take the same multiple choice exam that's not necessarily strictly from the lecture material. But that really depends on the medical school. So I think the best way to do this is ask students that are a couple of years above you or have went through your medical school, what are the structure of the tests and how do you get tested? Are they recycled board questions or are they professor written questions? That really is the big difference. And again, I'm sorry that I'm the only panelist that's on right now. We did experience technical difficulties earlier. But hopefully the other panelists are going to join me soon. Since we all went to different medical schools, we all should be able to provide our own insight. Okay, let me think what else. What I just want to ask, I'm sorry that I don't know if the chat is enabled, but the question is, let me see if I can make sure that the chat is enabled so other people can post and ask their questions. Let me see. Okay, I don't see a way to do this, but what I wanted to ask is whether people had spoken to students that had graduated from their medical school or that are current students. They have a sense of the curriculums in their school, because again, every medical school is a little bit different, but those are the gist of how they work. Okay, and let's see what else. So maybe people can now submit questions through the main chat box. Hopefully that's working. Okay. Other questions people asked and that were pre-submitted is if they should start before school begins.
Right.
Here, somebody answered, I'm the first year from my medical school and there's no class above us. Do you have advice for that? Okay, that's a really good point. If you're at a brand new medical school, which I would imagine most people here are not, but if that is your situation, then your school should be transparent about the curriculum and what the questions are based off of. So because, like I said, most medical schools are pass fail, and that should be readily available to you, even if it's a brand new medical school. You can find out if they're using NBME, National Board for Medical Examiner questions, or if they're using professor lecture based content. So that's something you can even ask faculty, or they should tell you from the get-go. I just don't know how you would find that out in advance unless you specifically, like, they posted a syllabus or a curriculum or that information online, without asking students that were the class above, because I think otherwise it becomes a little bit more challenging. But one of the questions people did want to know is if they should start studying before school begins. And we wouldn't necessarily, I personally, and again, the other panelists who unfortunately have not yet joined us might feel differently. I personally would not tell people to start studying beforehand. I would only tell them to start studying once school starts, because I think you're going to have 4 years ahead of you studying, plus 3 years to 4 years to 5 years of residency that you'll also need to study. And I just graduated residency and I'm now attending, and I have to study for my licensing boards. So you are going to have many, many years of studying ahead of you. I think it's a better idea to enjoy a little bit. I think it's not a bad idea to look into study resources and maybe, like I said, to students in the classes above you, or try to get resources that way, or even through your professors. But I think it makes more sense to wait until you actually start before you start studying. And now another one of our panelists is on, Dr. Tamar Dachoh, so I'll let her answer that question since I've been speaking a lot and maybe she has other insights. We were just talking about whether people should start studying before school, and we also talked about the traditional med school structure and curriculum.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm Tamar Dachoh, for those who I haven't met previously. Quick introduction, I went to Hofstra Northwell Zucker for med school. Now 7 years ago I started. I came straight from undergrad. I did not do a gap year. So I know that in my mind makes a little bit of a difference in terms of whether you study before starting. And I think it really depends on what your year before med school looks like. That's just my personal opinion. I was in a school where they had a specific program for those of us who were applying or matched into pediatrics, where we got a lot of hands-on sessions in our fourth year of med school. I also had my son my fourth year of med school, so my summer tuitions were later, so a lot of things were fresher in my mind. That all being said, even if you are going to study, the amount that you need to know is so vast. I'll be honest, I wouldn't know where to tell you to start. It's a lot of learning on the job. What I would recommend, if you want to feel like you're doing something before med school, is if you have a project, like a research project in process, I would try to finish that before starting to the extent that you can. And that'll be one more thing on, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. It's been a really long, I have pregnancy brain. We're talking about starting med school and not starting residency. I apologize greatly. Okay, so back up. I went straight to medical school from undergrad. But I think that stays the same, that it's so vast what you learn. I don't really think there's anything specific I'd pinpoint for you to study to begin. I definitely would not start studying for STEP. I know different people have different opinions on that. You will learn, you will have time to study for STEP. You should really take the time before med school to just have some time to yourself. If you do want to learn something, I really regret not learning basic medical Spanish. I tried to learn in med school, but then there was so much else we were learning. I couldn't do it, and I'm terrible with languages. And I think that's something that come in really, really, really handy. So if you feel like you need to do something, my personal opinion would be to try to learn medical Spanish, and then just to take some time to yourself. I don't even know what you would start studying. Please don't study for STEP before med school starts. Okay. And then I believe we have another one of our panelists on. Kira, do you think you could introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Kira Rynhold. I'm currently a fourth year at New York Medical College. I'm applying for psychiatry residency this summer. I took 2 gap years before I started med school. I worked in research for 2 years. I think the question was about studying before med school. Um, I'm just going to give it a hard no. I think that you have plenty of time to study in med school. And if you haven't already started, I know that schools have actually started this week or last. Enjoy your time and don't study. You'll have plenty of time to study in med school and you'll be very busy. So enjoy the time that you have now.
Okay, we can move on to the next question. Um, and we talked about it a little bit, so you know what, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip. Do you have any advice on how to manage your life outside of school? This is a hugely broad question. Kira, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, can you repeat the question? Just want to make sure that I have it right.
Do you have any advice on how to manage your life outside of school?
Yeah, so I think that it takes some time. I think that you can't really make a plan going in because it'll take you, first of all, you have to like figure out your own schedule. But I think Um, I got good advice once that, you can only have so many things going on at once. There's medical school, if you're in a relationship, your relationship, there's hobbies, there's friendships, there's family, and in an ideal world, we can have them all on our metaphorical stove on full heat at once. But I think the reality is that especially in med school, that's just not possible. So you really have to choose the things that are important to you. So if it's important to you that you do your hobby every week, whether that's, let's say exercising, if it's important to you to see your friends, um, I would try to figure that out, not even before you start, but at some point early on, because I think you have to really make an effort in med school to fit those things into your schedule. Um, so, you know, maybe there are people out there who can do it all and, see their friends and their family and, their spouse or partner and maintain all their hobbies. But I think in reality, and you have to sort of set your priorities. Um, and I think also really don't disregard taking care of yourself. So my first semester of med school, I figured out later on that I need 7 hours of sleep every night, but I was only getting about six the first semester. And my body physically started to react. I was getting really nauseous all the time. Um, you know, I was getting these weird headaches. And then I kind of realized, okay, I need to sleep 7 hours. And I just made it sure that every night I was going to sleep at a time or waking up at a time that I could get 7 hours. And it really helped. So listen to your body. I think like whether it's related to food or sleep or exercise, um, that can really clue you into what you need. But like I said before, like figuring out your priorities beforehand or, just figuring them out in general so that you can make time.
Okay. Dr. Goldman, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I thought that was a good point. It's definitely important to know what's important to you and also to prioritize because you're obviously not going to have time for everything, and your health and your physical and mental health are definitely the priority. But also, I think having a good social support system and like mental health support system, because I think most people that attend medical school, or maybe I'm just speaking for myself, tend to be somewhat self-critical, or we hold ourselves to a high standard, or we're perfectionistic. And it's extremely overwhelming, the amount of information you have to know, the expectations, and obviously you ease into it. But like we're all at the point where we're either finishing school or finished residency. So we're further along and our perspective has changed and we've gained better strategies on how to cope and how to, get through things. But I would say it's important to have some sort of support system, a therapist, going to the gym, trusted friends or family, and also knowing that you're on your own trajectory, because I was definitely comparing myself a lot to people that were not in the medical field, that were, let's say in finance and were doing better financially because they weren't in many years of school, or that were at a different stage of life where I was just, trying to keep up with the studying and the information we had to know. So like having those priorities and also that support system in place are really important. And not being too hard on yourself is extremely important because it's impossible to learn everything. And that's why, thankfully, unlike other healthcare fields, without naming them, you're in school and you're getting trained with residency for so many years that you will learn your specialty by the end. You won't know everything in medicine, but you will become relatively good at what you're supposed to know on a daily basis. Just at the beginning, they want you to know a little bit of everything. So you have to kind of be patient and give it time, and you will get there. You will get the training you need along the way. It just takes some time. So it's okay not to know everything. I think you're on mute.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. And just thank you guys so much. Something I just wanted to add, and I think Kira mentioned this, is there's also the ideal and the real. I happen to have worked through my first 2 years of med school. I have some classmates who did the same. I would not in any way, shape, or form say that working while in med school is ideal. I also was still dating. I was single when I started med school. And at some point, someone gave me the advice. I don't even know if I'd call it that, that really it would have been better had I gotten married before med school, because it's really hard to date and plan a wedding and have Shana Rishona while in med school. And it was terrible advice. Sure, that would have been the ideal. That wasn't the real. We made it work. And I think for yourself, you have to give yourself grace to realize that there is ideal and there's real, and what can you handle and what can you manage. And that will change as you go through different parts of your schooling. But it is definitely possible to keep your personhood while still being successful in med school. There was a question on the chat that I'm just gonna ask to our panelists. So how do you recommend we use our summer breaks? So I assume this is referring to breaks in med school. Now would be a good time to know that my understanding is most schools do not have breaks after the first year, but if there are some that do, that sounds wonderful. So I guess breaks or vacation time, how would you recommend using it? Dr. Goldman, can you start us off?
Yeah, so I was in the same situation where the only summer break I got was between first and second year. And I don't recall having prolonged breaks at any other point, because my school, the summer after our second year, we were already on clinical rotations. We were like finishing up. We had already finished our step 1 and we were on our clinical rotations. The summer between our third and fourth year of medical school, we were on clinical rotations, studying for step 2 kind of thing. I mean, it was a little distorted because it was COVID, and then the summer after your fourth year, you basically are graduating, going into residency, and then you do have a lot of time off, which is really nice. You often will have like 2 months off, if not more, in your fourth year, which is great. But if you're talking about from the perspective of becoming like a competitive residency applicant, I know people that have done everything from 2 months of research to 1 month of research and a month of vacation to getting involved in like being lab TAs for the summer, for the class below, or for other like graduate students. Some people will decide not to do any research and just to travel. I think that it depends a lot on what kind of specialty you want to go into. If you want to go into a competitive specialty, which are usually, and maybe I'm not including all of them, and obviously this changes. Like when I started medical school, emergency medicine was considered somewhat competitive. And now there's a lot of unmatched spots every year. For the past like 2 or 3 years, it's trended that way. Generally, primary care less competitive, subspecialty surgery is more competitive, but granted, it really does shift. Some years, like psychiatry has become extremely popular. It wasn't always as competitive and popular. But the point is, if you're going into what they call road, which are are good lifestyle subspecialties, and those are radiology, ophthalmology, anesthesia, dermatology, it often does look good to have some research. Sometimes people will take an entire research year. My husband did that for dermatology. He took an entire research year. And people do that. But it also helps to get involved in research early on. So that would probably be a good time to do it. I don't know if you need to do 2 months of research. It might be sufficient to do 4 to 6 weeks of research. It also depends if you like doing research. Some people enjoy it more than others. It's still much better than like doing like med school preclinicals, because you don't have to study really. You're just, either doing translational research or even going into a lab, like normal business hours, going home, relaxing. So you still do have somewhat of a summer. But I would say maybe do like research part of the summer and the rest of the time, enjoy your time. Again, there are people that have definitely matched into competitive specialties that didn't do research that summer, or like I have a former classmate that did like disaster medicine and actually traveled. So that sounds like a fun thing to do, because they were heavily considering doing emergency medicine. But yeah, I think for me, it's like hard to completely remove yourself from the rhythm and the structure. I happen to like having some structure, so I wanted to work part of the summer and then have the rest of the time off. But regardless, like I said, it's so much easier to have a personal life when you don't have to study after hours. Even in residency, it was obviously hard because your time is not your time, but you don't have to study nearly as much as you have to as a medical student. So it's nice to just like have Sundays or evenings sometimes to do other things. And that's all I'll say.
Okay, Kira, how did you spend your summer between first and second year?
Yeah, so I actually didn't do any research. I went on a nice vacation and then I kind of just chilled and worked at my part-time job. But I want to just emphasize what was said is that if you have any interest in dermatology, orthopedic surgery, the list is getting bigger every year because subspecialties keep getting more competitive. Even psychiatry now is more competitive. But if you have any inkling that you might be interested in it, the reality is, people will tell you like, oh, it's fine, you can change your mind at the last minute and figure it out third year, which is true, you can. But if you are maybe interested in it, I would say like it really is important to get involved in research in some capacity during your first 2 years, and your summer between M1 and M2 is a good way to do it. Even I think like general surgery now, you need publications. And I just want to also just clarify something about research is that quality is better than quantity, arguably. You can have your name on so many posters or papers, but then if you can't actually talk about it in a meaningful way, in a way that shows that you care about the topic, you're able to actually describe the research in a way that shows that you know it. That's, I would argue, and I haven't even really gone through the application process yet, but the advice that I've gotten is that, it's better to have projects that you're genuinely interested in, that you really contribute to, than like a bunch of random things on your resume. If you're like the biostats person and like you do a lot of data, it'll just end up that you get on a lot of publications because you're processing data, but that's a whole different thing. But just like, and I think at least in my school and in my experience, summer research and research during your entire med school, and that's the thing about research, it really keeps going. Especially if you find research you love your first or second year, it can continue all the way up to when you graduate. Um, if you're doing clinical research, and not lab research, some positions might require you to like be in the office or be in the hospital collecting data. But if you're doing something more like a chart review, or you're even in like the early stages of doing some research that will require you to eventually interact with patients, it's pretty flexible. Like you can do a lot of it from home, and like it's not necessarily you're going into some lab every day, which is nice. So you can still like, find time to do things that you like. But my advice in general, just to, I guess, sum it all up is, figure out what your priorities are. Like I said before, like if you really want to go on a vacation, go on a vacation. if you really think you're interested in derm or orthopedic surgery or ENT or even gen surg or even OBGYN now, like just look into it. I'm not saying you have to do it, but just think about it early because it'll really help you later on. So it's all about priorities, figuring out what you want. But just find something that you're interested in and that you care about if you are interested in doing research.
Thank you so much, Kira. So our next question, and given that we are now well past the halfway point, if anyone has questions they want to ask, please put them in the chat and I will be giving time. So this question, how did you, or what challenges do you find in terms of balancing from lifestyle or religiosity, however you would interpret that question, with med school?
I
meant for that question to be just as vague as I asked it.
Yeah, I was gonna say the three of us all attended medical school in New York. So I think our experience was probably a little bit, I don't want to say cushy, but definitely more comfortable in the sense that we were all able to live in very Jewish communities. I lived in Brooklyn. Tamar, I don't know if you lived in Queens or Long Island during medical school, but I suspect one of those. And then Kira, I think you live in the city, if I didn't make that up. Okay, so we were very fortunate in that we were very much all tied to a Jewish community, even throughout medical school. Also, like being close to family was nice. I went into medical school single. I didn't get married until residency, so it was definitely challenging in terms of what Dr. Dachoh mentioned about like the balancing the dating and also not comparing myself to friends that had gotten married at young ages and maybe were in a different place than I was financially because I was just a student like kind of scraping by. But I would say that it was very, very, and I still feel very fortunate that I did go to medical school in New York because again, you have the kosher food, you have the Jewish communities, you have access to the infrastructure. So I can't really speak to like going to school outside. Also, I went to SUNY Downstate. They have a lot of other Orthodox medical students. They're very familiar. We had kosher food available to us on Uber Eats. We could order from like other parts of Brooklyn. So I didn't feel like I was necessarily struggling in terms of having resources, but I just didn't have a lot of time, I would say, like I did in college. I also came from Stern College, which is a Jewish college where I had Judaic classes. So I had to kind of have as much time to do the things that I wanted to that were spiritually meaningful to me, like in terms of prayer, whatever it was. But I would say that even so, like we've been emphasizing, priorities are key. So if you decide that you want to obtain your standards and live an Orthodox life, you can still do that as a medical student. You just have to know that you might have less time. So maybe for guys, they might not have as much time to go to mincha because if they're on a surgery or chakras or whatever, they're on a surgery rotation, they have to be at the hospital at 5 a.m. Like there's no time to go to a minyan necessarily in those situations. But in terms of at least keeping the important things like Shabbos, kashrut, most medical schools, whether they're Jewish, like Albert Einstein and New York Medical College, or they're, secular medical schools, but based in like the tri-state area, I don't know if secular is a word, but you know what I mean, like not Jewish institutions, they will have encountered Orthodox Jews before, and they cannot discriminate against you in the formal textbook sense. Like they should be accommodating of Jewish holidays. A lot of us Orthodox medical students would take tests on different days than our other classmates, and it never really posed as a problem. I personally could say for myself, I never had an issue with taking off for holidays or whatever it was as a student. Obviously, it's a very different case as a resident because unless you're contracted specifically not to work on Shabbat, then you will likely work on Shabbat and the holidays. It's a completely different framework, but as a student, they are usually pretty understanding. But again, I don't want to speak for anyone else on here. I just know everyone on here, and we've all went to medical school in New York. So we were very fortunate that we had that going for us. If anyone wants to speak to somebody from JOMA that went to medical school outside of New York, we could try to connect you. I would imagine it's the same though. Like I'm living in Florida right now. I met some med students that are in school here. They also are obviously very blessed that they're near big Jewish communities. You know, for people that go to school, JOMA has med students in Nevada. We have medical students that go outside of the US to the Caribbean. So we could definitely try to connect you if that's your specific situation. But like if you're in the tri-state area, you will have the resources. You might just not have so much time to do those things like Minion, etc.
Okay, Kira, what was your experience like?
So I'm very blessed that I go to New York Medical College, which, if you're not aware, is part of the Turo system. So not only do we have a lot of Orthodox students in our program, everything in our school has to be kosher. Our calf is kosher. There can't be events on Shabbos. Um, so, I was very fortunate. The only thing I ever had to do in terms of like Shabbos or holidays was during my rotations. And because I think the faculty, there are so many Orthodox students at the school, the faculty had, it was totally fine. It wasn't an issue. So I don't really think I'm the best person to speak about this, but what I will say though is that like, um, even if you are in a place with a lot of Orthodox Jews, really make an effort to, if you're comfortable, if this is something that you're interested in, like don't be afraid to branch out and like become part of the greater medical school community. Some of my closest friends in med school are either Jews who aren't religious, or not Jewish at all. And I think it was really easy for me to sort of just could have been really easy for me to just, stick to the people that I knew. Um, but like go to events if you can and want to. Like really, you know, if you want to and if you're comfortable, like it, and especially like if you went to somewhere like Stern or another Jewish school, it can be intimidating. But I think like some of my relationships with my friends who aren't Jewish or not affiliated are, really meaningful, and I gain a lot out of them. So that's kind of just like the opposite perspective. If you are going to this place that has a lot of Orthodox Jews, of course, be friends with everyone you want to be. But I think, there's a lot to be gained by, being part of the general community. And even like, I'm on the student senate now, and, even though it's a Jewish school, I'm the only Orthodox student on the senate. And so I'm able to kind of be a voice for the Jewish community, even though, we are very much accommodated for. But like recently someone was like, oh, like it's annoying that we can't have events on Friday night. And I was like, yeah, I get it. Like, just here's some context why. But I think like people, I think it like, I don't know how to say this, but I think like there is a big opportunity to sort of like, I don't want to say be a Kiddush Hashem, but like, you know, branch out. And if that's something you want to do, don't be afraid to do it.
And I know I'm supposed to be moderating, not one of the panelists, but I actually had a very different experience than Dr. Goldman. Despite going to a school in a relatively Jewish area. So just wanted to give that perspective. That unfortunately, or however you want to put it, it is a double-edged sword to be someplace where there is more familiarity with frum Jews. My school usually had somewhere between 2 and 5 frum Jews a year in the class of 100, which isn't that many. We did stick together in terms of being united front of what we were doing about Yontif and asking for time off. We did unfortunately have a situation, and this is, I think, probably my biggest message that you may not hear now, but you will hopefully hear repeated throughout your time in med school, and then especially as you're getting into residency, where a few years before us, the Orthodox students did not follow the rules of what they were supposed to do in terms of taking preemptive. And it was and it really put a bad taste in the mouth of some administration and definitely made things more challenging. So you have to keep in mind, and this will be even more relevant in residency, as Dr. Goldman said, unless you're someplace that's a contractual Shabbos and Yom Tov, that you are the face of work of shoes for the people you're with, because even in a Jewish school, you're still going to be the minority. So it happens to be my school really wanted to be accommodating to from Jews. They hit some roadblocks, and it was definitely not perfect because they really wanted to. We had, say, kosher food at events 50 to 75% of the time. They did not give us any issues, for the most part, about taking off for Yom Tov. Once we hit our clinical years, it got a little more tricky. One of the course directors did say to one of my classmates, "I work on Yom Tov and I'm Jewish, so you can also." I had someone quote to me when exactly sundown was, so why couldn't I do this or why didn't I do that? We had non-observant students who asked for accommodations that the frum students never did, and then it put us in a tricky place. By and large, I do feel that my school really tried. I do feel like I was able to take off for Yom Tov. I did not work on Shabbos. I did occasionally work Motzei Shabbos. I worked a whole lot of Sundays because we did have to make up for time that we missed for Yom Tov. I definitely had a lot of catch up to play. All that in being true, I think that it was in a lot of ways easier being someplace where there was familiarity with Orthodoxy, but I wouldn't take that as a given, and I'll just be very, very careful to keep in mind that whatever you do will have very long-lasting repercussions that can be really, really hard to come back from. So, for example, I'm not asking Dr. Goldman to do what you did, but we as a group did not ask off for prayer, and we all came in Tisha B'Av. We came in on Purim. We actually had an exam on Purim, so we had a Suda after our exam. The three of us got together, took one of the study rooms, decorated a little, had a Suda, went back to studying. All had gone to Megillah first thing in the morning. It's hard. I think there are definitely things that could have done better, and there were occasionally things that were done like this, which is an unfortunate reality of what happens when that also happens probably more in New York than in med schools in the Midwest, but I can only speak to my experience, which was most definitely not in the Midwest. It was snacking all the I did find those fellow students were really helpful and supportive. Like at one point, I also was on public student council. And at one point I found myself running an event that was going to be on Shabbos. And I had a classmate who first one person asked me, they're like, well, I understand you can't just skip a week. I'm like, I really can't do that. It doesn't work that way. So one of my classmates who understood that I couldn't just skip Shabbos for a week covered for me running the event. So there, and as Kira said, I definitely try to integrate as much as possible because it's really hard to be in your own bubble in med school. It's not great for studying. It's not great for long-term relationships. And it's also pretty lonely. So as much as you can, try your best to integrate with your classmates. It's really hard as a frum person. It's really hard if you aren't going out on Friday nights or on Saturdays. It's tricky, but I definitely try as much as you can. That was a very long answer, and we are now running out of time. So I know we had some questions in the chat. I want to quickly just share a slide with you guys about study resources. So that was something that many people asked about. So I'm just going to pull that up. And then, Kira, do you think you can walk us through the slide as soon as I get it up? Okay. Kira,
Okay.
take it
Yeah.
off.
So what's cool about med school is that, unlike an undergrad, everyone's taking the same courses. And not even, within your own school, within the whole country, everyone's gonna be in the same residency programs and like taking the same standardized exams. So schools really, as far as I know, try to make sure that the curriculum is pretty standardized. And so in that vein, there are all these different resources that you can use because, um, you know, the materials is basically the same everywhere, so that these resources can help you because, they're all covering the same material. So I guess let's talk about question banks first, just because I think that's like the easiest to explain. So my philosophy, is, and you'll have to figure out your own study style as you go through med school, but the best way to study and sort of practice for exams is to take questions. So some of you might have used UWorld for the MCAT. It's pretty popular. But UWorld is sort of this website that has thousands of questions. There's like a step 1 mode and a step 2 mode. Step 1 is the exam you take generally after second year, after the preclinical curriculum. Step 2 is the exam you take after the clinical curriculum, somewhere at the end of your third year. And these questions, you can sort it by topic, by subject, and that really just helps you practice the material. AMBOSS is similar. It's a little bit harder than UWorld in my opinion, but what's cool about AMBOSS is that they also have uh, like a library, I guess, of information, sort of like Wikipedia, but everything you need to know about the subjects that you're studying. Generally, UWorld is people's like go-to, but AMBOSS is good if you're like me and you love practice questions and you just want as many as you can possibly get your hands on. Scholar RX is similar. Questions I think are slightly not easier, but simpler than UWorld and AMBOSS. But they also have videos, but their main thing is like, practice questions for exams. So question banks will be helpful throughout med school, but specifically during your third year, because you're taking standardized exams throughout the year in psychiatry, pediatrics, medicine, etc. Even first and second year in the preclinical curriculum, they can help you study for step 1 and your in-house exams. And then we'll talk about videos. If you're someone like me who likes a visual, you can't just listen to a lecture. These are great. Dirty Medicine is free on YouTube. He has a lot of high yield videos and things that will show up on mostly on step 1. Boards and Beyond, I didn't personally use. I'm a very visual person, so I like to have nice images in front of me when someone's teaching me. He's sort of just like a couple of words on a screen, but he's very concise and he really is very deep. Not, I guess he's detailed and concise at the same time, but he's very thorough, I guess is what I'll say. And he has material throughout like preclinical and clinical curriculum. Med Bullets I didn't use, I'm not so familiar with, but I think it's also, um, pretty concise information about what you need to know your first, for I guess all 3 years of med school they have. And then I guess I'll talk about Pathoma, because I think that's under additional resources, but it's kind of similar to Boards and Beyond. It's a book and it's videos specifically for your pathology course during your preclinical curriculum. He also, his visuals aren't great, but he literally has everything you need to know for your pathology exams and step 1. Step 1, pathology. First Aid is a big book. It has a step 1 version and a step 2 version. I think generally the step 1 version is the more helpful one. It has really good little charts and pictures, everything you need to know for step 1. It's not super detailed, so there might be things in your in-house exams that won't be covered in first aid. Let's talk about sketchy and pixarized because those are kind of very unique things that I didn't even know what they were until med school. So, your first 2 years of med school, you are going to be memorizing a lot, specifically in your microbiology courses and your pharmacology course. And sketchy is really cool. Pixarized, I think, is the same style, and just you can Google it for a visual after this because it's kind of hard to visualize. But they take these things you need to memorize and they turn it into like stories slash mnemonics that make it really helpful. You know, I'm working with residents now who will still reference the sketchy videos they watched like 5 years ago about certain classes of drugs. And it's really, really helpful. And you'll find that like almost everyone in your class will use it. And like, you know, you'll still be talking about it, like I said, when you're in residency sometimes. Um, so all these you have to pay for except for Dirty Medicine, which is free. My school gave us Scholar RX for free and Pathoma for free, but it'll differ based on your school. We also got a UWorld discount. Um, but everyone has a different philosophy about how many you should use. Some people say less is more. But over the first, over all of med school, you're just gonna have to figure out what works best for you. Something else I saw here that I really liked is called Osmosis. It's kind of a video resource, but it's very visual. So it has a lot of nice pictures and images and drawings. So, if that's something that you like, you can check that out. And also Ninja Nerd, he's not on this list, but he has free videos on YouTube about, different things in physiology, anatomy, neuroscience, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, like I said, you'll kind of get used to it as you go through, but there's a lot available to you in med school, which is nice compared to Premed.
Okay, thank you so much, Kira. So it's now 9 o'clock. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. There were a couple questions in the chat. I think let's just briefly talk about gap years. So the question is, do people take gap years in the middle of med school? I can just mention that I personally did not, but I have friends in some schools will let you do kind of a hybrid where you do your third and fourth year over 3 years instead of over two. So I know that's definitely something people have done. Dr. Goldman mentioned that her husband took a year off for research, which is also very common. I mean, COVID made things a little bit interesting for our cohort, but about 10 to 15% of my class did take a year off. Taking time between the first and second year is less common. And I do think it is school specific, but that's definitely something that is accepted. And some schools are more accommodating than others. Dr. Goldman, I don't know if you want to speak at all to your husband's gap year.
He actually took 2 years off in medical school. One of them was between his second and third year. He was in the process of becoming religious. He started becoming religious in college, went to yeshiva after college, and then as he started becoming more religious in medical school, he decided that he wanted to go back to yeshiva, to like a slightly more religious yeshiva. I mean, he went to New York Medical College, so it's a Jewish school. And then when he was interviewing for residency, he did talk about how he learned Jewish medical ethics he was like studying ethics. And he did write like a thesis on ethics to tie it in so that he could make it seem like he was also learning something applicable to the field of medicine and it wasn't just a yeshiva year. And he did I think some volunteer work in Israel while he was doing these things. And then he took a separate year to do research. But I don't think it's the most uncommon thing. I have a lot of friends that took, again, for the competitive specialties, it's almost unfortunately like the norm now for like dermatology. I have a friend that a few people do it for urology, plastic surgery. It's annoying because medical school is long and expensive and you want to just be done, but it really is the norm in some of these fields. But people also do it when they have kids in the middle of medical school. People do it sometimes for their mental health, or sometimes I'm sure for financial reasons. I can't always speak to others, but I think as long as you're able to integrate it well into your whole journey so that when you are applying for residency and you are interviewing, it shows that you're still, resilient and hardworking and professional and not just like your stop and go. I think it's fine. It's the same thing as taking a gap year between undergrad and medical school. That used to be less common, I think, like 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think now it's most applicants do it. Some people take 2 to 3 gap years. So I think there's nothing to frown upon, and I almost think it's expected for competitive specialties.
I'd agree with Dr. Goldman that, I guess, yeah, derm, ophtho, urology, it is the exception to the norm not to take a gap year. Usually that's, or a research year, usually though that would be later, before your 4th year. Something else, another option that some schools offer, if for whatever reason someone decides to do this, whether career-wise or life-wise, is some schools offer the ability to get a master's and then do your master's over a year, and then you finish med school in 5 years with your MD and a master's. So I know my school offered both an MBA program and offered a Master's of Public Health program. So that is something else that many people do, and then you have a different schedule for that year, or you'll be what's referred to as off cycle, and will be more of that kind of hybrid 3rd, 4th year. There is a lot of flexibility in most schools after your preclinical years, and now as more and more schools are moving clinical years earlier and earlier, that flexibility would only increase. So you don't have to be worried that you're locked in for 4 years to the standard med school schedule. With that, it is now 9:08. I think we'll call it for the night. This recording will be sent out, and then we are all active members of the Premed committee and happy to answer any questions, even though you have officially graduated from Premed to med student. Jonah is still here for you to offer support with any questions that you may have from anything that arises. A great night, everyone.